Hello, everyone. This is Eddie Valenzuela from the Hill Life Group at First Baptist Church, Mansfield. Today we'll be reviewing chapter 22 of Joshua. Last week, Jeff did a podcast of Joshua 10 where he reviewed the lesson that he taught the Sunday before that. And it was a great idea. I thought it was good for us to, it was his idea that we would review these on podcasts and eventually get together as all three teachers, Corey, Jeff, and myself, to be able to get together and discuss some of these studies. Obviously, it's been hard to do that, but we did start reviewing the lesson that we teach, and so it took me a little while this week. Been a really busy week, but I'm glad to be able to get a chance to actually review Joshua 22 with you guys. In this week we cover actually skipped a bunch of chapters. Jeff taught chapter 10 of Joshua, and I'm jumping all the way to 22. Well, that's a big gap there that we're skipping. And this reminded me a little bit of when we were teaching the book of Revelation, same Explore the Bible study from Lifeway, and it skipped a lot of chapters. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of stuff we got to cover here. But fortunately for us here, there's one verse that'll actually cover everything between chapter 10 of Jeff taught in today's study of 22. And that verse is actually in Joshua 21, verse 43, where I'm going to read it to you. It says, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their fathers, and he took possession of it and settled there." So the context of this study right now, where the Israelites are at, is they've already gone into the promised land. They already conquered it, and they divided it among the tribes according to the way God told them to. So they went in there. It's all settled. Now they're settling into their homes, into their lands. I say homes, but really into their land. Now, there's 2.5 tribes that we're actually going to be focusing on today. And what they did and how they did it and what happens afterward. Like I said, the land has been conquered. The promised land has been conquered. And so these 2.5 tribes, which are the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, their story actually starts back in Numbers 21, when the Israelites actually conquered the land on the east side of the Jordan. So this was before they crossed into the promised land. And they defeated 2 kings. The kings are Sihon and Og. And they went in there, destroyed them, conquered them. God gave them that victory, and God gave them that land as well. And so these 2.5 tribes, before they're about to cross into the promised land, they actually tell Moses, says, "You know what, Moses, we like this land here. It's suitable for livestock," and these 2.5 tribes had a lot of livestock. So when they looked at the land, they're like, "Hey, man, this will work great for us, and so we want to stay here." So that's exactly what they told Moses. They said, "Moses, we want to stay on this east side of the Jordan. Not in the promised land. We don't want to." As a matter of fact, they even say, "We don't want to go there." And so these comments and these questions about whether they can stay there actually made Moses angry. And as you can imagine, 40 years earlier, there was a group of people, and a lot of the Israelites followed them, who did not want to cross into the promised land. And so this all was coming back to Moses' memory as like, hey, so are you guys saying the same thing as your forefathers, that you don't want to cross over? And that's what made them so angry, because they thought, you guys have no faith, he has no trust. And he actually tells them in Numbers 32, he says, "You are just like your fathers." And so Moses was angry. But of course, these 2.5 tribes actually explained to Moses, like, no, it's not that. We like this land, and it's actually going to work for us. If we can stay here, that would be great. And so Moses thought about it, and he says, "You know what? You can stay here. But when your brothers cross over into the promised land, you're going to go with them and fight." Because they already knew that there was fighting to be happen. They're going to have to go in there into the promised land and remove all the wicked people from there. They knew they were going to do that. And so Moses tells them, when your brothers go in to fight, you're going to have to go in with them. And you're going to go in there and you're going to fight alongside with them. So these 2.5 tribes go, "No, we will do that. We'll do that. We'll go in there and we'll fight alongside of them. And that's what we'll do." Well, jump up to chapter 22. And that's exactly what they did. They kept their promise. And one of the things that I really enjoy about studying the book of Joshua, and as I've read it in the past before, is just what a great example of a leader Joshua was. I mean, he gives us a great picture, great characteristics, great qualities of a leader. Just something that we can look to as an example as we lead, not only at work, but in our homes as well. As parents, as we lead, everywhere you're at, you have the opportunity to lead. And so these characteristics and these qualities that Joshua portrays here are just a great example for us. And so as we begin this chapter 22, we see this. We see that Joshua, the first thing he does is he actually commends these 2.5 tribes. He says, man, you guys did great. In verses 1 through 3, he tells them, you guys kept your promise. You did what you said you were going to do. And he says, you have done everything Moses, the Lord's servant, commanded you, and have obeyed me in everything I commanded you. You have not deserted your brothers even once this whole time, but have carried out the requirements of the command to the Lord your God. So he tells them, he says, man, you guys have been faithful. You fought along your brothers. He publicly celebrates their faithfulness for not only obeying God, but obeying Moses and obeying himself. And he recognizes their loyalty. He says, man, you guys were loyal. You were loyal to us. You were loyal to your brothers. That's a job well done. And so the first 3 verses in chapter 22 is pretty much just Joshua praising these guys. If you think about it, when we make a commitment as Christians, we should keep it. I think Jeff talked a little bit about this last week. We're representatives. We represent Christ. And so when we break our commitment, we're representing Christ. Not saying that he breaks his commitments, but we give that picture. We're the first thing people see as Christians before they see Christ. One thing I tell my kids when they go somewhere else to somebody else's home is I tell them, first of all, who do you represent? And they say Christ. Okay. And then second, who do you represent? Our family. So you represent somebody. And same thing with us. When we keep our commitments, we're representing Christ, and it shows that as Christians, we keep our commitments. And so this was great for these 2.5 tribes, but it also shows the leadership of Joshua. Because last week, I keep going back to Jeff's study last week, he said that, Joshua kept his commitment. Not only Joshua, but God. So you see those 2 leaders, God being a leader and Joshua being a leader, set the example, set the tone for these 2.5 tribes. They're like, if our leaders keep their commitments, we can keep our commitments, because I'm sure at times the fighting got rough and it got hard, but yet they kept their commitments. And we see this, another example of Joshua being an encouraging leader. He was catching them doing something good. Joshua being an encouraging leader, he was actually practicing what I like to call John Maxwell's 5 W's for an encouraging leader, which he was watchfulness, words, writing, wallet, and winning. So first of all, watchfulness, he caught him doing something good. And then words, he told them about it. He says, you guys did a great job by keeping your promise. And then he told them and praised them for that. He commended them. Writing is another W, is writing things down that people do good. When people are doing a great job for you, you write it down so they can have it and it lasts longer than words. Now, wallet is rewarding excellent performance. And so we see this here in the next few verses, how Joshua actually rewards these 2.5 tribes. And then winning. In other words, you encourage others by setting the example, because when you win by doing things the right way, others see that and that leaves an impression on them. And that's exactly what Joshua was doing. That's exactly what God does. He leaves an impression on us. Joshua left an impression on these 2.5 tribes to keep their commitments, no matter what happens. And they did. They kept their commitments. Now, they fulfilled their obligations. They did everything they said they were going to do by keeping their promises. And so now Joshua in verses 4 and 5, Joshua actually says, hey, you can go home now. You can go back to your side and settle in your land. You can go across over to the east side of the Jordan and settle there, where the land that Moses gave you. And this is really important, because now the promised land, as we look in the journey of the Israelites, the promised land corresponds to a fulfilling relationship in a Christian's life. That whole journey of being set free from Egypt, then going through the time in the wilderness into the promised land, that whole time period actually corresponds to the same journey that a believer goes through when he comes to trust Christ as Lord and Savior. For example, Israelites were set free from Egypt by what? The blood of a lamb. Well, in the same way, we were set free from sin by the blood of the lamb. And at that moment, when our relationship starts, and when the Israelites are set free from Egypt, that's when our experience with Christ begins. And if you look at the Israelites' time in the wilderness or after they leave Egypt, you see there's doubt, there's fear, there's wanting to go back because things aren't as easy as they thought it was going to be. And it's the same thing we experience sometimes as Christians. When we become Christians, we go through those doubts. We go through the fear. Or we go through, you know what? That looked better than it does now. Why are things so hard now that I'm a Christian? When back before, it wasn't that rough. It wasn't that tough as it is now. But you know, that's a walk that we go through to learn how to trust Christ, to learn how to have a relationship with Him. And that's exactly what God wanted for them during that time. God was trying to establish a relationship with Him, which finishes actually by them entering, conquering, and dividing, settling in the promised land. That's how it finishes. That promised land represents a fulfilling relationship with Christ, with God. That means once we settle in the promised land, that means we trust Christ, we trust God, we know that He is in control. And then in verse 5, we see something that Joshua tells the 2.5 tribes of what they should do. In other words, they said, hey, when you go over there, back to your side, of course, Joshua's same things apply, he's going to apply those same principles to the people on the west side in the promised land, the west side of the Jordan. And he says, when you go over there, he says, only carefully obey the command and instruction that Moses, the Lord's servant, gave you to love the Lord your God, walk in all His ways, keep His commands, remain faithful to Him, and serve Him with all your heart and with all your soul. And so he wanted to make sure that as they went over there, that they didn't forget to do those things. Obey God, love the Lord your God, remain faithful, serve Him. And all those things that he lists there in verse 5 actually is an example of what a relationship with God, a relationship with Christ should look like. We should obey Him. We should love Him. We should remain faithful to Him. And we should serve Him. And I like how it says it here, with all your heart and with all your soul. In other words, with everything you got. That's how you should serve Him. And sometimes it's difficult to do those things. And it's hard. And just like for them in the promised land, their battles weren't over. They were still going to have some battles. And there's still going to be some people who actually start chasing other things that aren't good for them. And that's why Joshua was expressing this to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and that half tribe of Manasseh, so they wouldn't forget these things. And so once again, we see another great leadership quality here of Joshua, of telling them, reminding them of what they need to do, and is very important. Now, verses 6 through 8 are pretty much, we see here that Joshua is practicing one of the 5 W's of an encouraging leader. He's sending them back with a reward, with actually, if you would say the wallet part is the W, but with a reward. He says, hey, you guys go back over there and take these things. And he gives them, first of all, the first thing he gives them is blessings. And how important it is to actually praise your people, praise your kids, people that you're leading, and just pray blessings over them. That they would know that, hey, you know what? This person wants the best for me. And that's what Joshua did. He says he sent them with blessings. He sent them with not only a blessing, but he sent them with gold, with iron, with cattle, with silver, with bronze, and with clothing. I mean, things that they would need. Joshua sends them with them. And this is very cool. The last thing he commands them, he says, I'm sending you with this, but share it with your brothers. Share it with your brothers. And isn't that important for us as Christians, that what God has blessed us with, He saved us from our sin. He saved us from hell into a fulfilling relationship with Him, where we trust Him and we love Him. But also now He gives us blessings, not only material blessings, but He gives us family. He gives us the relationship of being with Him alone is a blessing. And the things we have, and being here in the United States, we are full of blessings, of so many things that we have. But He says, share it with your brothers and your sisters. And that's what we should do. We should always remember that, because, in John 13:35 says, the way people will know you're my disciples is by the way you love each other. Well, thanks again for today, and I hope this blesses you. Thank you for being here. God bless.